So today, our guest lecturer on looking at public finance as commons is Himanshu Upadhyay. He is an assistant professor at the School of Development in Azim Premji University. He's an academic, an activist, and a writer. And some of you, I think Tejas, Shivali, and John also met him when he came to Bangalore for our first dialogue on accountability and commons. Himanshu has been looking at the social and economic issues related to large dam projects, mining, governance of ecology, and the public finance also around it, the finance and the public finance around it. He has been a part of many campaigns, networks, and movements that are looking at these issues from the point of view of rights of communities. Like the lecture will also indicate to you, Himanshu has one of the greatest strengths of him and his work that we draw onto is just the meticulous attention that he's always paying to the story of the money. Where is the money coming? Where is the money going? What are the accountability, formal accountability institutions of the state that are supposed to be looking at what is happening to the state of public finance and whether it's going for the intended purpose or not, which is the CAG's office. Also pouring through hundreds, thousands of such audit reports and always alerting to concerned citizens, organizations, governments, movements, media, on where do we need to pay more attention and what the facts and figures and numbers are telling us. So thank you, Himanshu, for agreeing to give this guest lecture at also a short notice. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. And we're all looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rakshita and NLS for inviting me for this guest lecture within what is an elective course. I was speaking to Rakshita earlier today, and I understand that you are students, all of you are students of Masters of Public Policy at NLS, doing your second year, first semester, and Rakshita has also taught you in previous semester. So let's start the conversation. The way we are going to go about structuring this is that the first 30 minutes we'll spend going through the conversations around looking at public finance and public funds as commons. Then we would take up a case study, and we will see how what we talked about in the first half an hour fits that case study. Does that case study give us enough sort of fiscal figures and concerns arising from those fiscal figures and the fund flow, and the funds either getting locked or getting reappropriated. And the last 30 minutes, we'll open the floor for question and answer. But feel free to stop me in between. I'm also going to keep asking you a series of questions and seeking your responses. So let me begin with a bit of a question around language and the culture. Within Indian languages, if we see the culture that informs the practices of looking at fisc, looking at money, looking at currency. And some of those sayings again talk about allocative priorities. When you have a resource, how do you distribute that resource? And how those decisions shape your own understanding of what is the moral compass, and how do you construct the universe around you and relationality around you with that moral compass. Both your decision shapes it up as well as your own worldview shapes up your allocative priorities. So anyone who wants to volunteer to give us from your own mother tongue some kahavat, some aphorism, some saying, proverb that tells us about money, that tells us about finance, relationality. Hardik and Khush both share my linguistic community, and there is one such aphorism in Gujarati. But we would like to go to other linguistic groups and see if there are any. पैसा झाड़ पे नहीं उगता. Money doesn't grow on tree. So how does so money, unlike this biological resource called tree or the natural resource, is also not a natural resource per se, correct? In some other words, what sort of commodity is the currency note or the coin? And there's a fascinating history. Historians have dealt with the growing of economy around the idea of you exhibiting your purchasing power through carrying a promissory note which has been issued with a sovereign guarantee. And this Hindi kahavat, this Hindi saying also distinguishes it, saying that it's not God's own gift to us. It's money is very much a creation of men, and so it's a societal thing. It's a cultural evolution during the story of evolution that the human society has found the way of not merely transacting and building relationality with each other on the basis of needs and demands through the natural products that they were exchanging earlier. At some point of time, they entered into this understanding of assigning value to natural product. And as soon as they assigned value, that value had to also give birth to certain thing to enter that conversation. So that brings me to the second question, which is what do we make of the word fisc, which is a noun, and what's the meaning of the adjective fiscal?
So fisc generally refers to the royal treasury, right? Fiscal has a more doing, as it's a verb, right? Like how do you manage it? So fiscal has like a lot of element of human action, but fisc is just a thing. It just refers to your royal. I mean, now of course the state treasury. Like how much money do I have? So that's the noun.
Good. So fiscal, unlike the most commonly used word finance, is not quite holding into your pocket or your digital wallet some money. Fiscal is mostly used to denote government money or public money. Again, this is a slippery slope that most of the dictionaries giving us the word meaning of fiscal walk into. What's the government money? And whom does it belong to? Does it belong to the finance minister? Does it belong to the citizens of the country? But this fiscal policy or fiscal infrastructure or architecture that most of the modern states build onto relies also into the theory of the state, where it's very hard for us to imagine a sovereign state without having a fiscal sovereignty. Correct? So what does fiscal sovereignty mean? The very idea of a modern nation state also stands on one of the most fundamental pillar, which is to say that modern nation state has the sovereign power to issue currency and certify the promissory notes, correct? And also has an absolute power to call it that from midnight stroke of such and such date, all these notes would be worth the paper on which it is printed. The demonetization moment, the great moment, and because the central bank that guarantees you, and it guarantees, whom does it guarantee? So again, the pickpocketers are in business because like the note is, and the monetary value that is denoted on the currency note has to be paid to the bearer of the note. That's the word, not the owner of the note. Correct? And again, like if your currency is something that is not being tendered in an open market with the transparent monetary transaction, it has to be returned. So the tone notes, etc., correct? So that's the fiscal sovereignty part of the modern nation state, and hence you would also understand that any effort of issuing a parallel currency would, in the securitized notions of sovereign state, would be evaluated by law and order agency as an effort of overthrowing the state. Correct? And hence, I mean, all these things, that it's a fiscal sovereignty that also is one of the fundamental pillar of the modern nation state and its commands on the sovereignty. Its ability to issue currency notes, print currency notes, also call back currency notes, that the currency notes will lose its value and would be merely of the worth of the paper on which it is printed. So it's mostly when one talks not of finance but of the fiscal, about the taxes, about states' authority to impose revenue and earn revenue and things like that. Now, that brings us to this idea of the fiscal state, correct? And how does the idea of fiscal state evolved? Is again a fascinating story. There has also been a sub-discipline within the sociology called fiscal sociology. And there has been some fascinating writing coming within that discipline from Europe. Unfortunately, if I ask you, like within the sociologists, prominent sociologists of India, how many people dwell into the fiscal sociology? I don't know how do I answer this question myself, correct? If someone asks how much of a fiscal sociology writing is coming from India or even the South Asian subcontinent. But basically, fiscal sociology is a domain where you are interested in understanding how does the fiscal state interact with her citizens. And I'm purposefully using the word her because at some point, if we have time, I'll show you a short clip from Sri 420, which is for me a very good understanding and a teaching resource to talk about public goods and commons, where Raj Kapoor goes to sleep at night on a footpath and he is being confronted by another guy who has come before him and says, you have to give a pagadi if you have to sleep on a footpath in Mumbai. This is a Mumbai, my friend. And then the Kelewali Bai intervenes, and that short clip from the film Sri 420 makes a comment about the government with an adjective that the Kelewali Bai uses, saying "My Baap Sarkar." It's both the words. It's a sort of parental attribution given to the government. But increasingly, some of us think that using the feminine pronoun would do us some help when we talk about the obligations of the state towards citizens and again fiscal obligations, correct? So it's not, the relationality doesn't only have to, when one talks about fiscal relationality with the citizens, it doesn't have to be that I can keep on imposing taxes. Because if that is an understanding, then that doesn't quite help us to say that this is not a feudal state. Correct? If you were a feudal state, if you were a monarchy, if you were a pre-democratization moment sort of political state, then probably you could have gone on only thinking that you can tax the citizens and they are obliged to you to pay. In the modern nation states sort of political theory of the state derives its power to impose taxes because it first tells the citizens that we shall give you. It's a social contract between the citizen and the state. The state has to come in if there isn't a food sovereignty, if there isn't a food security in the state. If there is hunger, if there is malnutrition, the state has to step in and act first. And because the state has to spend addressing these issues, that the state then asks some of the other citizens to come up and say that please pay higher amount of taxes. So within the taxation policy also, again, the priorities, who is to be taxed at what rate and etc. enters the architecture. Just give me a minute.
Yeah, I thought something happened from our end. Sure.
So the next thing is, what are the laws then governing fiscal commons or public finances commons? But before we go there, now that we have defined what is a fiscal resource and whom does a fiscal resource belong to, is there a distinction between fiscal resource and wealth, or are the two one and the same? If you think we have some answers in the room, that is fiscal resource and wealth two different concepts, or are they one and the same? Actually, yeah, Namrata, go ahead.
I would think they're different because I feel like wealth is a macro set and fiscal resource is a part of wealth. Like fiscal resource, I would think about it as generally I'd look at it only as something which has like some relationship with a public fund of sorts, right? Wealth need not be like, I also feel like I can spend like recurringly my fiscal resource, but wealth is more of an asset by itself. Not that fiscal resource isn't, but you can make the comparison in my head. It's very similar to capital and revenue.
Capital and revenue. We'll come back to these two words, capital and revenue, when we are talking about government accounts. And but anyone else?
Also to do with, I don't know, for me, the connotation is private wealth and public resource.
Public resource, yeah. Great. So the Article 13(9).
But just to, sorry, there's an overlap. So I was also thinking about the public and the private, but then I realized when I talk about wealth, it can even be wealth of the country per se.
Wealth
right?
of the nations, sort of.
Yeah. That probably wouldn't come under my fiscal resource by the tightly, like how we understand fiscal, again, how I understand fiscal rather. So that's what I was thinking about, because the first thing which hit me also was public and private.
Correct. So again, so when people talk about having earned some amount of wages, which are increasingly now paid in cash rather than in kinds, correct? Then they say that this is what has come to me because of the labor time and the labor that I have put in. This is what I have earned. And me and my family at the most would have a claim over this. No one else. Correct? And then it would be sort of a private notion. Correct? It is not to be shared with society at large. It is not to be shared with humans and non-humans, human subjects living around, beings living around us, sentient beings. So fiscal resource of the state and fiscal resource of a human being or a family. So a family can have certain income that they have earned, correct? And that income cannot be used up in totality. The income tax also, if someone is going to refer to that, will have to be imposed in a style where it doesn't lead to pauperization of your citizens, but is imposed in a manner that you have some amount of redistribution coming in, and imposing wealth tax, imposing income tax, etc., is a measure where the state gains its capacity to take the resources from the haves and distribute it amongst the have-nots. Sorry, no? I'll put my phone on silent. So then it's again very interesting to understand that what is revenue, and all of you would understand why I'm bringing in this word, because it is making rounds in media, correct? Some political leader and an elected constitutional post holder person has made reference to the revenue culture at the time of election campaign. So what is revenue? And linked with that is another question. What is the Hindi Urdu word khairat within our sort of vocabulary? Because I have seen this notice boards that some clinic or dispensaries used to be called khairati dawakhana. Correct? Dawakhana having that adjective khairati. So what does the revenue and khairat then mean within our conversations? Can we have more participants? Okay, Namrata, is that?
So I worked on this topic as well for my accountabilities for comment submission. So I actually came across all of this, and it's fairly interesting because khairat is essentially, I think it has an Islamic origin, which means benevolence or charity, right? And Revdi came from the Prime Minister himself, right? He said, what are we going to do with this culture of Revdi, which is freebies? At the same time, we have a Supreme Court case which is being vociferously fought about does freebies account to corruption or no. So I think if that's what you were looking for.
So this sort of references to freebies and certain amount of certain notions of distributing freebies as part of election promises. Khush says something that is free from labor, something that is not earned, something which is not rightfully yours, something that has come as an unworthy of being claimed the product of your own labor, sweat and blood. So there is a lot of cultural connotations here when you say that you have earned something with your labor and you have got something. So lottery lag gayi hai kya type of things within the society, correct? So you having won a lottery is a sheer coming of certain amount of money into your family without having performed the labor that is earning to you that. And there has been this connotation about rowdy culture of freebies, and the Prime Minister has made reference to this in the recent things, in recent proclamations of his. But what's a freebie or what is a free lunch? Correct? Is there anything called a free lunch? And as Namrata says, that Khairat doesn't have a very negative connotation. And again, I use the phrase, correct, Khairati Dawakhana. And Khairati Dawakhana probably was a banner or a heading of a small clinic, where by putting that itself, there was this messaging to the patients that you please come without thinking how much is going to be the medical expenses that you will have to incur in the time of illness, because you have come to a clinic which is promising you free medical care. So the free, as in Khairati Dawakhana, is not free as in freebies. Freebies takes as a very negative connotation, that it is just being offered by some political party in order to bribe voters in voting for themselves, voting for that particular political party or things like that. So again, this Revdi culture or Khairati Dawakhana sort of thing within our cultural connotations is something that we need to pay attention to. Which is bringing us to this point. Can we name some of the fiscal obligations of the state? And what are the fiscal responsibility of a modern nation state, of a state, sovereign state, as personified and delegated by a finance minister? What is the fiscal responsibility that the state owes to her citizens? Can we have some show of hands and fiscal obligations of the state, fiscal responsibilities?
If nobody wants to go for it, I could probably. I have a. Pardon? Could you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go
I
for
have
it.
terrible network, so if you guys lose me, you'll probably have to ping on the chat box. I think it's more about like what our frameworks are, and two ways of looking at it is through the legislature and through the executive, right? Now, what does the legislature essentially do, right? For starters, the budget. The constitution itself says that you cannot spend any money apart from what comes across in your appropriation bill. So that's one of their main functions. On the other side, you have the executive, right? Like the finance ministry, which prepares the budget. You also have like essentially the CAG, then come, so let's like I'll be a little more structured. So you prepare the budget, you legislate the budget, then you have treasury management, and then you have audit of accounts, right? Now, audit of accounts, you can see it in two places. One is, primarily two places. One is the Controller Auditor General, and the other is essentially a finance commission. Now, CAG essentially is who looks at, your PSUs, how your states and centers like essentially spend their money. On the other hand, the Finance Commission is again a constitutional body under Article 280. What does the commission do? It ensures that interstate finances, right? Devolution of finances, and how exactly does that take place? So that's mainly the fiscal function of the state per se. So I feel like it also, you could relate it to the ongoing case, right, on freebies, where the Delhi government came ahead and Kejriwal's government came and filed a interlocutory where they said, hey, freebies is not necessarily, so if you stop banning freebies, can't I give away electricity and water? So you can beautifully, weave it into what exactly, we don't have an answer on what exactly does the government owe us from a fiscal perspective. And I think we could analyze it in that way.
Thank you, Namrata. So that brings us to this notions of fiscal responsibility, fiscal obligations that the state, as personified and delegated by a finance minister, owes towards citizens. And within our sort of parliamentary and legislative calendar of an annual fiscal year, there would be 2 or 3 events where you would see the face and shape of fiscal state in all its manifestation. Namrata has referred to one, which is that the budget speech that is delivered by the finance minister. This year, she did not read out her budget speech from the printed papers, and so she and her government was calling it a paperless budget. Certain budget study and financial accountability groups have called it a peopleless budget. That's budget 2022-23. So again, that brings us to this question, that this contradiction of the finance minister herself calling her budget speech and the budget and the financial roadmap for a fiscal year as paperless budget, but the analytical groups and citizens groups calling it peopleless budget, brings us to this question as to these 3 fundamental questions that the course's structure also asks when you are talking about commons as our framing of securing people's claim over public finance as commons and over the fiscal state as a sovereign being that has obligations towards the citizens in the modern democracy. And how does this happen? How does Indian citizens secure people's claim over public finances as commons and over the fiscal state as sovereign being is something that we need to put our mind to. Second is securing people's institutionalized democratic participation in fiscal policy making. Now, you would have seen certain media reports that talks about the fiscal policy meetings that takes place in RBI, and there are all these economists sitting as experts talking about inflation and keeping inflation and food inflation in control, and hence announcing what is going to be the repo rate and things like that. Correct? How do you ensure people's institutionalized democratic participation in budget making, which is basically setting allocative priorities? Where will the money come from? And most of the time, you see that the way budget is communicated to the people, they also draw up this chart of where is the rupee coming from and where is the rupee going, where they will show you within the pie charts of a rupee as a spherical concept, and then the different allocations. Where is the money coming from and where is it going? Sort of representation as a visual way of communicating to people and citizens what has happened in the budget. And the third is securing people's institutionalized democratic participation in ensuring the truthfulness of accounts of Government of India, state governments, and local self-government institutions. And all these 3, and how does this happen? Sort of conversation that we need to hold, correct? So, what are your ideas of how does a citizen sitting in Jumri Talaya somewhere or sitting in some distant place from New Delhi take claim to public finance as commons, as belonging to, and as belonging not to the government, but public funds as belonging to public? And me as a citizen, as a person who is a citizen of this nation state, is taking claim to that fiscal resource, saying that this fiscal resource belongs to me, not to the state, not to the finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman. She has been just given the responsibility of managing it on my behalf and set the allocative priorities in conversations with people like me. How does that claim making happen? Yes, Khush.
I don't know. This is something that I've been thinking about for a while. Maybe it is difficult to look at it as an entire budget, but we can definitely see the role of decentralized planning. The way, for example, labor budgets are prepared. That is one way for us. The other ways probably are to uh, like you know like create those mechanisms of participations through Ward Sabha, through panchayats, where, because again there is a union government that budgets, and there is a state government, and there are local governments. So I think try and see how decentralized planning can be in order for all three to plan the allocation of resources and other fiscal responsibilities better.
Thank you. So, as Khush said, that just being a passive recipient whose claim making on the state happens only once in a 5 year, when you are asked to line up before the electoral booth, is not going to make public finance a commons. Correct? The public finance as commons will only happen when all the citizens will also start engaging in an activity that I call commoning. Correct? It's like that day when we were discussing a few days back this notion that a fish worker going into the sea and staking claim on a fishing ground as an everyday business. It's not once in 5 year business. Democracy is an everyday business. And you ask these questions every day on an ongoing basis. You ask these questions when someone calls this the culture of freebies, that there is nothing called government money. Government gets money from us. It's our money. And hence this very inspiring slogan that came from the accountability movements in Rajasthan called "Hamara Paisa, Hamara Hisab." Easily, you can't have a line department or some district collector saying it's none of your business to seek accounts from me. It's none of your business to seek muster rolls of NREGA worksite from me. Because in India, if you see the 1970s pre-right to information movements and all these accountability movements that emerged from ground below, there used to be this notion which was completely the notion of taken over of the commons, as if the citizens had outsourced the business of commoning to elected leaders. I remember there was someone called Kamla Beniwal who memorably, when she was water resource minister in Rajasthan, said that every raindrop that falls from the sky belongs to the irrigation department of the state of Rajasthan. A laughable claim to make, because she was making this claim when people had already started taking charge of the water resources that lay at their hand and had started building johats in the villages with Tarun Bharat Sangh. And here was a political leader representing some constituency in Rajasthan Legislative Assembly, making this claim that people cannot stake a claim on what will happen to the rainwater that flows through the village commons. And people have already started making those claims. And the then President of India had gone to Rajasthan along with the late Anil Agrawal to give an award to a Gram Panchayat who has done good work on rainwater harvesting. So you start making those claims on the public finance as commons with slogans, with active participation in the activity of commoning, and demanding the fiscal state to respond to you and hold a conversation with you in the framework of a social contract. You also do that by saying that the budget making has to be not an opaque exercise. that only happens in line departments preparing the demand for grants, and demand for grants then go up. There is some estimates committee that go on visiting districts and getting the figures of what are the aspirations. But a budget making becomes an exercise which is a participatory exercise, a participatory fiscal policy making exercise that is telling us what are going to be the priorities, allocative priorities of the citizens. And a lot has happened on both these fronts, as I was talking, demanding accountability, also seeking participation in budget making process. As Khush said, in the local self-government institutions, it is happening increasingly now that people are staking those claims. The third thing is equally important because, and that's where the case study will tell us that we as Indian citizens or groups interested in public finance and accountability cannot rest once our allocative advocacy has been answered by the state, by the finance minister. Because we may run into situations that finance minister actually listens to our demands and allocates fiscal resource. But then there is this puzzlesome question of a persistent underspending or non-spending, again, of special purpose funds, not general purpose funds. The funds that were created in the name of a specific purpose, because in the general fiscal resource pool, the finance ministers were not able to find enough resource to give away. So how does one secure people's institutionalized democratic participation in ensuring truthfulness of accounts of Government of India, state government and local self-government institutions? Is again, the account keeping responsibility has been given within the constitutional infrastructure to certain people. Namrata was referring to them. But asking that once finance accounts and appropriation accounts get tabled in assembly, what do we as citizens do with those accounts? How do we read it? How do we make the reading of this accounts, finance accounts and appropriation accounts, an affair that takes it in the realm of demystification, that makes the common citizens feel like, yes, I can also read the finance accounts and appropriation accounts of my state government. I can read the finance accounts and appropriation accounts of my urban local body. I can read the finance and appropriation accounts of my Panchayati Raj institution. So again, you would have seen in the process of public hearing, this collective reading out of accounts is a procedure that is paving the way, but this has to also move from micro to macro level. And within this cycle of the fisc moving, the last loop is that who is going to ensure that there is a truthfulness of accounts, that some stroke of pen does not hide something which should be transparent to me, is the job of auditing. But then the question is that, like many other constitutional institutions, India's constitutional audit institution also has a motto, which is in Sanskrit language. What is it? What's the claim that they make there? They use a Sanskrit phrase called Lokhitartha Satyanishtha, allegiance to truth in the interest of people, not in the interest of state. They are not saying Sansad Hitartha Satyanishtha. They are not saying that in the interest of legislative building. No, it's in the interest of people. But then, if that is your motto, the question happens within your auditing sort of cycle, within your auditing work and auditing calendar, where does the public figure? What's the scope of public participation in the public audit exercise, in the constitutional audit exercise? And that again tells us this very fine distinction between social audit and the public audit as in the constitutional imagination of what is going to ensure the legislative accountability and parliamentary oversight on the spending. Increasingly, in last 2-3 years of the work that I am doing, I have been articulating this question that audit shall also be bothered about non-spending. But all auditing methodology is all about trying to seek utilization certificate that only happens after utilization happens. Correct? If you have not utilized money, how do you produce utilization certificate? And I was asking even students who are here with us at Azim Premji University this question that, hypothetically speaking, and again, not hypothetically, these are things that have happened in other states. If there is a grant that has been allocated in a fiscal year's allocative priorities by finance minister of that state, and let us say that that grant was given to Jodhpur district and Kota district to institutionalize something called Silicosis Research and Rehabilitation Center and purchase medical equipments so that you can do early diagnosis of silicosis, which is a very deadly occupational disease and things like that. And every year, there is 5 crore that is allocated and dutifully surrendered at the end of a fiscal year. Is that a good governance or is that a bad governance? No one is there is no embezzlement. There is no stealing of these 5 crores. But if these 5 crores keep on going back from Jodhpur district to Jaipur at the end of a fiscal year, how do we look at this behavior of persistent non-spending? Is an interesting question that enters, because if we look at public finance as commons, that's a question that our auditing institutions must answer. So a few questions, because I have been speaking in the monologue style for a long time. What is your understanding of what happens once a CAG of India's audit report gets tabled in assembly or in parliament, once that enters public domain?
The Public Accounts Committee examines it. That's my understanding of it.
Correct, Namrata. So there are committees in legislative assemblies and parliaments. These are, again, by convention, Public Accounts Committee is headed by a parliamentarian who belongs to an opposition party, not to the treasury benches. And the Public Accounts Committee is going to discuss this audit reports and also call in the ministries, secretaries of those ministries to depose before them to discuss certain audit paragraphs. And CAG of India can also go and sit as a friend, philosopher, and guide of the Public Accounts Committee. That's a sort of understanding. What is also happening is this, that the audit report is not a public document unless it gets tabled. Not a public document that citizens right now can demand even under RTI. So if me and Khush file an RTI request to, let us say, government of Odisha, saying that there is a draft audit report on District Mineral Foundation, please provide us a copy. This RTI application is going to yield us a nicely worded response saying that this is not a public document. And unless this gets tabled in assembly and becomes a public document, we can't give it to you. There was an audit on Chennai floods that my friend who is a journalist in Chennai, Krupa, had sought to get under RTI, and she was told that not just the audit report, even the correspondence between the auditor's office and the chief secretary's office, everything is under Official Secrets Act unless the report gets tabled in assembly. So we said, nice, but then Official Secrets Act stops getting applied and you can't be charged for espionage and be put behind bars if you have obtained the correspondence between the chief secretary's office and the principal accountant general's office once the report gets tabled. And that's what actually happened. It's very interesting that the huge bundle of papers that came as a correspondence while that audit process was on has become a chapter in her book on Chennai floods. And what I'm hinting at is this, that we cannot outsource the responsibility of discussing audit reports to Public Accounts Committee or merely MLS. As Krupa, a citizen in Chennai, did. Being a journalist, being a citizen of Chennai, she said, I will seek what has gone behind these audit paragraphs. I will seek each correspondence, each replies that the audited entity has filed to the auditor. And the audit institution, again, is a public office. It is governed by right to information, and you can file the right to information requests, provided that the audit report has become public document. Every other correspondence related with that audit report also is a public document that comes to you, including the replies that are filed by the line department and audited entity. So again, making public audit count is a citizen's responsibility, is something that we can't outsource to MLS and Public Accounts Committee. While they will do the constitutional task that they are cut out to do, we also will have to make reading finance accounts, appropriation accounts, budget, our passion and engage with all this, because while performing those activities, we would be becoming a commoner. We would be shaping public finance as commons. Public finance as commons is not already given, not already there. It's in becoming, in the process of becoming, and it becomes common when a citizen becomes a commoner who gets involved in the task of. And as Rakshita was saying, like for last many months, it has become a routine and a habit of trying to see when a new audit report has entered the public domain, and then inspiring others to engage with that, comment on that, point out there could be errors that can creep in the audit report, but those errors again gets corrected not by MLS, by lay citizens, by students of law like you and me. I have taken more time, but we are at 3:30, so I should quickly move on to the case study part. If
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah.
So generally, I am not again going into this theoretical details of how the accounts are kept. There is a consolidated fund of India, there is contingency fund, and there is a public accounts of India. That's how the fisc is divided. Quickly, consolidated fund of India is finance minister giving her the power of spending. She can spend from consolidated fund of India. Public accounts is not her money, and at no stretch, I mean, even a very lay person also cannot say that public accounts money is a money of government. Consolidated fund also is not a money of government per se, because government cannot spend without parliament giving the authorization. Public accounts is where the state is merely a trustee. The money belongs to citizens / special purpose. And again, money doesn't belong to So if, for example, if the stated social purpose for which a cess is created, the money has to go into public accounts in that accounting head, because if it's a building and other construction workers welfare cess, then it cannot be spent on paying your staff salaries. Correct? It belongs to construction workers welfare. It can be spent only there, and that's why public accounts and more work needs to be done with public accounts. Consolidated Fund of India will come under a lot of scrutiny during budget, because that's where she would be drawing up her pie of where is the money going from. So the case study that we are going to discuss again is going to tell us about how the fund flows from Consolidated Fund of India to public accounts of India, and what happens when there are slips between these two, and what we have been discussing in last few years of our work along with other researchers is this puzzle of unspent funds and the consistent short transfers into the designated head in public accounts of India. So let me share the screen and take you to the So here is the article from The Wire that I wrote during the COVID pandemic. This was published in the month of May in 2020 on 28th May. So while the COVID was hitting us, the National Social Security Fund that the Government of India has had carved out, and this was a fund that would have given the fiscal teeth to the law called Social Security for Unorganized Sector Workers Act of 2008. So while the act is of 2008 and was something that became the law with President's assent on December 30th, 2008, as we can see, many states had not yet legislated the rules under the Act number 33 of 2008, which is a parliamentary act. And in the year 2009-10, which is the subsequent fiscal year, Finance Minister had not given any fiscal allocation to the National Social Security Fund. The first allocation had come in the year 2010-11, and I'm reading out from the part of Pranav Mukherjee's speech when he said, recognizing the need for providing social security to the workers in unorganized sector and as a follow-up to the Unorganized Sector Workers Social Security Act 2008, it has been decided to set up a National Social Security Fund for the unorganized sector workers with an initial allocation of rupees 1,000 crore. This fund will support schemes for weavers, toddy tappers, rickshaw pullers, BD workers, etc. So how did civil society activists and budget study groups respond to this announcement when Pranav Mukherjee declared this during the budget speech? J. John, the executive director of Center for Education and Communication, a Delhi-based non-profit, said the amount is actually a pittance and does not make any sense when you look at sheer number of unorganized workers who need protection. A budget study group, CBGA, said that the allocation of rupees 22,841 crore should have been made, which is 0.39% of the GDP of India. And they were making this argument because it was actually recommended by the National Commission on Employees in Unorganized Sector, what is also called Sengupta Committee report, for providing universal social security coverage. Few years after this moment of budget announcement of 2010-11, on 22nd April 2013, the Minister of State for Labour and Employment stood up in Parliament to answer a question about the implementation of the 2008 Act and revealed to his colleagues the other parliamentarians from the nation that only 11 states and union territories had framed rules, and only 10 of these had set up state-level social security boards. The state that had not framed even rules under this 2008 Act are these. But we should also see that the Ministry of Labour and Employment was the nodal ministry for implementing the budget announcements on National Social Security Fund. And the National Social Security Fund was to be transferred from the Consolidated Fund of India. And this, again, these digits are account heads 223560797002, which is a Consolidated Fund of India accounting head. From this accounting head, all the receipts of NSSF had to be transferred to NSSF in public accounts under the major head 8235, General and Other Reserve Funds, and subhead 128, National Social Security Fund for Unorganized Sector Workers. Here is the list of the fiscal years compiled from the audit reports. The second column shows us the budget allocation. The third column actually shows us the actual disbursement into the public accounts under the National Social Security Fund. The third column represents the short release and the percentage of short release. In the year 2010-11, 1,000 crores were allocated, 1,000 crores were also transferred to the public accounts. No expenditure happened. There was no short transfer, but at the end of the fiscal year, up to 31st March 2011, zero withdrawal from public accounts. Nothing had happened. 2011-12, Finance Minister again allocates 1,000 crore, but Finance Ministry Babus make only 500 crore go into public accounts. So the 500 crore that has been promised as an allocation remains within the Consolidated Fund of India and can be spent anywhere, as the whims and fancies of Finance Ministry Babus having control on the fiscal flow determines. 2012-13, the short transfers were now mounting up. Finance Minister was giving the unorganized sector workers 1,000 crores, but the public account had a replenishment worth only 120 crores. 88% was the volume of short transfer. 2013-14, the allocations also had started going down, not coming to 22,000 crores at all, other than the first 3 years when the finance minister had promised to give 1,000 crore, it had gone down to 600 something. And for the next 2 years, and you remember in 2014, there was a general election and the government changes, the new regime comes to power. And in 2014-15, in the budget, 607 crore was promised, only 107 crore got transferred. 82% was the volume of short transfer. Lo and behold, as Arun Jaitley becomes the finance minister, in the 2015-16 budget speech, he says 607 crores would be given to National Social Security Fund. Not even a single rupee out of 607 crores that is allocated moves to the public finance accounts. 2016-17, because he would have been advised by Finance Ministry Babus, he doesn't even bother to make any fiscal allocation for National Social Security Fund. So how much moved into National Social Security Fund in public accounts had was 1,927 crores. And why could Arun Jaitley afford to not even give an allocation in 2016-17 was right from 2010-11 up to 2014-15, a part of what was announced and allocated had moved into public accounts, but there was zero withdrawal, meaning zero expenditure. Entire amount of 1,927 crore was lying in the public account head unspent. So at the time of auditing union government accounts, belonging to the year 2016-17. These are the words in the CAG audit report. I quote, audit observed that during the year 2016-17, the entire unutilized or accumulated amount of rupees 1,927 crore lying in public accounts under National Social Security Fund was returned back to Consolidated Fund of India in March 2017 by the Department of Economic Affairs and was credited to the minor head. In this regard, the Department of Economic Affairs was asked to inform whether approval of the cabinet was obtained before the amount of rupees 1927 crore was returned back to Consolidated Fund of India. The reply was awaited. So this is how in the fiscal year 2016-17 and at the fag end of the fiscal year 2016-17, Department of Economic Affairs was behaving with a special purpose fund that was for unorganized sector workers. And during COVID time, I thought that this was a time to remind again the readers and the policymakers as to what are the costs of this sleight of hand that the bureaucracy has mastered as a fine art. This actually should have been banner headlines. However, the lofty rhetoric on the theme of social security benefits was all that unorganized sector worker who was now, during the COVID pandemic and lockdown, walking back or cycling back to the native places from the megapolis had got. Thanks a lot for listening to me. I'll stop sharing, and if there are any questions, let's take them.